Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome again to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville government, politics, news, business, education, whatever gets our attention. I'm Jesse Mayshark, co-publisher and co-founder of Compass, which you can find at CompassKnox.com, which covers all of the above and more. And I am joined, as always, by Scott Barker, co-publisher and co-founder of Compass. How are you doing, Scott?
Doing fine, Jesse. Waiting. We're recording this on Friday, waiting for the storm of the century to arrive. And
right. It's lovely out right now, although the wind is starting to pick up a little bit. It's kind of funny. School was canceled today because of this wind, and we're going to be talking about the state legislature this week, so I could make some kind of joke about an ill wind coming from Nashville, but I think I'll just leave that there. I do want to mention, since it's Friday, that it is also De La Soul Day today. For the first time, legendary New York hip-hop outfit De La Soul's first 6 albums are available for streaming. It's what I was listening to on the way over. It's what I'm going to be listening to when I leave. It's what you should be listening to right now instead of this podcast, or at least after this podcast.
Let's say after the podcast.
After the podcast. If you don't want to listen to De La Soul right now, we are going to be talking about some things that happened this week. We have an interview coming up with Ellie Kittrell of the United Way, talking about a major report and action plan they came out with this week dealing with early childhood education. We will be talking about some things in the legislature, including following up on some of the kind of high-profile culture war bills that we've talked about in recent weeks. Also, an interesting proposal from a couple of Knoxville representatives that would affect Knoxville City Council elections. And to get us started, let's start at the University of Tennessee, which is adding 3 new colleges on the Knoxville campus. This is not something they do a whole lot, where they create new colleges. So, Scott, tell us what's going on there.
Now, in fact, it's the first time in more than 50 years, as far as they can tell, that a new college has been added, and they're adding 3. This was all approved at the Board of Trustees winter meetings was a week ago Friday. So what they decided to do was basically take the School of Business out of the College of Arts and Sciences and give it its own college. So it'll be they're going to be expanding their academic programs. Whereas as a college right now, there is no doctorate of music degree.
Oh, sorry, you mean School of Music. You said School of Business.
I'm sorry, School of Business.
Yes. We already have a College of Business. Right? Yes.
The School of Music, and the there is no doctorate program right now. They'll be creating one because that's what standalone colleges do. They have graduate terminal degrees. That's what. Yeah, that's part of it. It's going to be down the road a little bit, but that's going to be its own college. Then there is going to be we've talked about this before, the Baker School of Public Policy and Public Affairs. It will be that's where the Institute of American Civics is going to be located. It's going to be part of the Baker Center. The Baker Center is going to stay. It's going to keep it continue being a think tank, but it's also going to have a a college. Therefore, they're going to be bringing some programs in from political science, for example. There are going to be some other. They're going to be creating programs as they move forward, and so that's formally created. And then there's going to be what's called, and this is a mouthful, a College of Emerging and Collaborative Studies. That is going to be a place where they can create majors that don't exist anywhere else. Now, one of the things that UT administrators emphasize when talking to the Board of Trustees is that all of these are good for business. There's a big business focus. For instance, the College of Music, they talked about how it would expand its offerings to support the music industry in Tennessee, which, as we all know, is big. And so there's going to be an emphasis on the business of music, in addition to performance, which is what now is pretty much the focus. So now, obviously, the Baker School will not be business oriented; it will be more government oriented. But again, its purpose is to have an effect beyond the campus into the civic realm of the state.
Kind of create the next generation of policy leaders.
Yeah, and then the College of Emerging and Collaborative Studies is kind of it's going to be kind of weird because there are already interdisciplinary majors and things like that, but this is going to be a place where they're going to actually, from what they said, work with businesses to create majors that would create or provide educated workers with specialized knowledge in their fields. And I don't know what that looks like exactly. They don't either. It's they're going to have a dean, but they're not going to have faculty members in the college. They're going to draw from other programs and put it together. And I don't know, like I said, I don't know what exactly that will look like. I don't know if they do either.
And some of the instructors may actually be people, like adjunct people from business and industry themselves, right?
Absolutely. And I was thinking about this earlier this week and was saying, well, how can I kind of get across what this is actually going to do? And I'm not a creative enough business person to really do it, but I came across the idea of if a firm out there that specializes in building sports stadiums, for example, wanted to UT to create a sports stadium construction and facilities management degree, then they would pony up some money, maybe provide a couple of faculty, adjunct faculty members, get UT to bring in people from engineering classes, existing business classes, things like that, to create this unique major to serve that niche. And that's probably more of what they're thinking about.
So we've talked about public-private partnerships recently in a couple of different ways, but this sounds like it's almost kind of bringing that into the classroom, into the course offerings.
Yes, absolutely. It absolutely is. And they talk a lot about being able to leverage private sector money to help pay for these programs. And of course, with the business school or business college, or business, I keep saying business. It is the music business college essentially, but the music college, for example, would have it could be named, and the building they're in is already named after Natalie Haslam. It could be a possibility. I joked with somebody earlier. It could be the Dolly Parton School, College of Music,
sure,
or whatever. Whoever they can get to
can learn a lot about the music business from Dolly Parton for sure.
Yeah. So, but these programs aren't costing UT a lot more money.
Basically, some administrators that they have to pay for.
But basically, it's going to be new deans and their support staff. Things like that, primarily, not entirely, but primarily. Each of the colleges already have space. They don't have to worry. They don't have to build a new building for any of them. They're each going to cost between $2 and $3 million a year to get going. And of course, we already the Baker College already, or Baker School already has state funding earmarked for it from the legislature from when it was created, and so it's not going to cost a great deal of money. And they expect with the increase in donations, public-private partnerships, and tuition, of course, that the cost will either still be manageable or go down.
Right, not going to have a big impact on the budget. And
no,
obviously,
it's a $2 million budget. I mean, it's not.
all of these programs have this kind of focus in various ways on meeting the needs of employers, meeting the needs of the workforce, on the Baker side, kind of meeting the needs of the state for people who are well-versed in policy. And that does seem to be a major focus and theme. And obviously, I mean, UT is a land-grant university. That is kind of what it's set up to do in a lot of ways. That kind of conversation, though, it's worth noting, does also often rankle some faculty because, you can get into this discussion about, are we just kind of a job training center as opposed to, your kind of traditional liberal arts, nurturing forming fully engaged and involved citizens and so forth.
Right. Critical thinking skills, those kinds of things. Whereas, the fear among those are that you're right, it's going to be a vocational school where they teach skills, but not the kinds of soft skills that creative thinkers. And and they have a point. I mean, it's pretty interesting that liberal arts education especially gets the short shrift. One of the things, this was years ago, I don't know if this is still the case. So it'd be years ago, I was looking at the College of Business, not the music business, but the business, and their MBA program. And their MBA program at the time, the majority of their students, their undergraduate degrees were in liberal arts, not business. And so even the business school saw the value of liberal arts education. So
right, and of course you could spin that a couple of ways. People could also say, well, it's all those liberal arts majors got out there and realized they needed to learn how to make money.
Well, that's true. That could be.
But it's kind of, and I think if we look at some things that are going on in some other states, especially Florida, which has some very aggressive bills, either pending or passed, having to do with the content of higher education courses, you can imagine this discussion continuing in future years here about, clamping down on the ability to teach about certain things and then focusing resources and energy in other places. And, those tensions have always been built into the higher education system in a lot of ways. But I think we can anticipate that, especially if some of these bills that are in Florida right now come to Tennessee, say next year, which often happens, this could become a more pointed conversation about what exactly our colleges are there for.
Right.
All right. Well, speaking of the legislature, we don't have to talk about the Florida legislature, fortunately, because we have our own legislature here also doing interesting things. This past week, they passed, both the House and Senate passed in final form a couple of bills we've talked about. One restricting who can attend certain kinds of drag performances. And of course, as we have talked about, exactly what those parameters are a little fuzzy in this law. It's a little unclear what is going to be considered a violation of this law. We may not know unless somebody goes out there and stages a drag show someplace and, tries to find out what is going to be prosecuted, what's not. They also restricted gender-affirming care of any kind, medical gender-affirming care for people under the age of 18. Anybody currently undergoing that kind of care basically has a year to wrap it up or maybe find someplace in another state that they can continue it. And then also there was some, and so neither of those were surprises. They were expected to pass. Governor Lee signed them very quickly. I forget which one of them, but one of them had to go back for a final approval from, I think, the Senate and got signed off on. And Lee actually signed the bill 3 hours later, which is unusual. It can be days, sometimes even a week or more before he signs a bill. He and the Republican supermajority see these bills as, they would say that they're very important, but the emphasis that they have put on them this session, I think, also shows that they think these are politically good bills for them. They want to be out in front. Bill Lee wanted to be the first governor in America, which he is, to sign a bill restricting drag performances, although several other states are following close behind. Seth, did you have something you wanted to jump in on those before I...
Well, no, I was thinking about the drag one, and it seems to me that it reads that it's going to be very much up to whether the local sheriff's office and how they want to perceive that. And so one of the thoughts I had on it is what happens if, say, one of the more liberal communities in the state, Nashville, Memphis, Knoxville proper, opts to kind of let it slide, and what authority the state would have to come in over the top of, a Sheriff Spangler not enforcing what the state considers, even though they're very unclear what they mean by it, but what the state considers to be what sexualized drag performance in public kind of deal, and what would the state have to come over the top, or could they come over the top of a Spangler in a situation like that?
Yeah, I think it would be hard. Well, so, Glenn Funk, who's the DA in Nashville and who is kind of embattled for various reasons right now, but Republicans in the legislature have been at odds with him for a while because he has made several comments about bills that he basically is not going to enforce or is going to make low priorities. He's said that about the abortion ban already. He has said that about the drag bill, that Nashville is not going to be prosecuting drag performers. So on the one hand, I think we're going to continue to see that fight play out between Funk specifically and the legislature and the governor. But more generally, I think it really is going to be mostly up to local law enforcement. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, I guess, could theoretically have... You may remember David Roush, who's the chief of TBI, got pulled in by some legislators to discussion in December about this drag show that they had at the Tennessee Theater, which, as far as I know, really just meant Roush calling and having a conversation with the promoter and the people at the theater to make sure that the show was okay. He was obviously satisfied with that. Certainly no charges or anything came out of that performance. So, I guess we'll just have to see. I think it is going to be mostly up to local law enforcement, as obscenity enforcement already is. And I think that one thing, and I've said this a bunch on this podcast, I'm going to say it again, obscene performances of any kind, drag or otherwise, are already severely restricted under state and local law. They were before this bill. They are now. The fact that none of these drag shows that people have raised concerns about have ever been prosecuted for violating obscenity laws ought to tell you that probably these drag shows are not violating obscenity laws. Yeah. And since this bill that has passed basically just refers and kind of adds drag explicitly to the existing obscenity law, one would tend to think that shows that didn't violate the obscenity law before this bill are going to continue to not violate it. But there's been so much rhetoric around this bill, and depending on where you live, you may well have a local sheriff or somebody who decides that, well, I didn't go after drag performances at our local pride celebration last year, but there's been so much talk about this and people are so worked up about it that, like, this year I'm just going to.
Well, because unfortunately for us, I'm looking ahead to the 24 election cycle, even though Spangler's not on there. But how much will this start bleeding into our commission and other local elections that are going to pop in around
it could,
here?
Right? So
or is it far enough away that it's going to be, that's...
Well, and I don't just think, you think about somebody like Spangler, sure, he's term limited, but he still has things he believes, right? He has things that he ran on and things he values. And so let's say that the same show comes back to the Tennessee Theater this coming December, the one that was here this past December. And let's say that it becomes clear that the Knoxville Police Department doesn't have any inclination to try to shut it down. They certainly didn't last year. But some county commissioners raised a lot of concerns about it this past year. And let's say the sheriff decides, the sheriff does have law enforcement authority within the city of Knoxville. It's kind of exercised in collaboration or they're careful about how they deal with KPD. But theoretically, could the sheriff's office send somebody to that show and look for something that they think might be prosecutable? I mean, sure, they could. Does the DA's office really want to deal with prosecuting drag queens? I mean, a lot of these are going to come down to local decision making, I think. But I think the real goal of this bill is to make people not hold these shows in the first place. Like, don't you think that it's more the chilling effect they're after than throwing drag queens in jail?
I think it's the chilling effect that they're after, and it also plays well in a lot of legislative districts, especially outside of the cities. I think it's a way to appeal to the constituency that they have without actually doing anything. And this bill technically doesn't do anything, as you pointed out. And but and local law enforcement, including DA's offices, they have broad discretion on what they actually do.
And obscenity has always been a somewhat subjective standard.
Yeah. I mean, they can, it's as simple as, if you run a red light or run a stop sign and an officer sees you, they may pull you over, they may not. It's up to them, and they exercise discretion on a daily basis and scale it up to something like this. And, there's no telling what kind of decision they'll make.
I mean, probably DA's offices are giving a good hard look at the obscenity laws. And I mean, I can't think of an obscenity prosecution in Tennessee. Do you remember the last time we had an obscenity prosecution?
No, I don't.
They're hard. I mean, typically they have been very hard to win because the First Amendment's pretty strong and there's a volume of court precedent protecting freedom of expression that you have to overcome. But, things seem to be in flux on the First Amendment front in many ways right now, in many states, and it's an area that is probably ripe for some action. We'll see what happens. The other bill or bills I wanted to mention have to do with abortion, which, as we had talked about, there have been some proposals, including one sponsored by Senator Richard Briggs, our own local Republican state senator, to what they say clarify, what other people say create exceptions or exemptions to the abortion ban, but basically for medically necessary terminations, the kinds of issues where a sudden medical issue comes up, a fetus is not going to be viable, and the mother's health and life are in danger. And a lot of people, we just had another case in Tennessee, went viral this week on TikTok where a woman posted about how she's having to travel to New York State to get a procedure to essentially abort a fetus that has stopped developing and is not going to develop, is not going to be viable. But she is in Tennessee, has to carry it until either a medical emergency happens that threatens her life, or she eventually gives birth to a non-viable fetus. So a bill to try to provide protection for doctors who make a medical decision, this is something we need to do, that has been moving through, but it's run into really strong opposition from Tennessee Right to Life, which has just taken an absolutist position on the bill. No, we want the ban as it is to remain, no changes. And they've been threatening lawmakers that they will, withhold endorsements. They already revoked their past endorsement of Briggs from this past election cycle, and they are having some effect. Briggs has had to delay that bill for 2 weeks to try to, essentially shore up some support. And this is despite that bill being supported in the House by House Speaker Cameron Sexton, actually came to a subcommittee hearing to try to clear the way for it. So even though you have legislative leaders on the Republican side pushing to just loosen up that ban a little bit, obviously most abortions would remain illegal, it's a huge political fight because I think Tennessee Right to Life and the National Right to Life doesn't want, having just enacted bans that they've been trying to do for decades, they do not want to start to see those slide back. What they actually would like is for a ban like Tennessee's to be duplicated in many other states. Right. So it's very unclear, unlike the drag and gender care bills, which flew through, have been signed into law, it's very unclear whether any abortion legislation is going to actually emerge from this session at all. All right, let's talk about another bill that is very specific in its impacts, although it is a technically statewide bill, Scott, which has to do with City of Knoxville elections.
Yes, the City of Knoxville has, I used to think it was unique, but there's at least one other city that does this in Tennessee, process of electing district city council members. Now, there's 6 city council districts, 3 at-large districts, which is the city as a whole. But in Knoxville elections, the voters in the district, and only the voters in the district, vote in the primary. And the top 2 finishers in the primary go on to the general election.
No matter what even if somebody wins 80%, right, in the primary, yes, the second place person still goes on to the general.
Then you go to the general election, but in the general election, every voter in the city can vote for every council race. And that's very unusual in the course of this. People I talked to didn't know of any other city. I found out actually after the story was posted that the city of Morristown does that. I looked it up, and sure enough, it's in their charter. But it's very exceedingly rare. And 2 Knox County legislators have filed bills, companion bills that would eliminate that, and it would be like county commission, where it's a district only vote in the primary and a district only vote in the general election, and city voters wouldn't get to vote for someone who lives in representing another district.
Would there be, I don't know if the bill says anything about this, but would there be the potential that if somebody won more than 50% in the primary, they wouldn't have to go to the general?
No, not in this bill. This bill, it doesn't mention that one way or the other. First of all, what the bill does is actually, the default state law is district only in primary, district only in a general.
District seats should be elected by district residents.
Right. Mm-hmm. There are exceptions. Mm-hmm. And what this bill would do would be just to remove those exceptions. Mm-hmm. So it only talks about district representation. Now the House version is sponsored by Elaine Davis of Knox County. She is in her first term, just in first session of her first term, and she, in the committee that is considering that in the House, she talked about how the current way of doing things in Knoxville disenfranchises voters. So and it has happened, mm-hmm, that someone will win in their district only race and go citywide and lose.
Right. Sometimes win by a lot in the primary, but then lose at the citywide level.
And we can give you an example of that. Councilwoman Seema Singh, who is still in office, but her first time running in 2017, there was a 4-way primary. The winner, James Corcoran, had 47% of the vote or so. She had 22% or so. Mm-hmm. So she, was, and then there were the other 2 candidates. But they go on to the general election, and she won handily,
right,
in the general election. And basically what happens is, you've got 1/6 of the city voting in the primary for each race, but then they run citywide, and you've got 100%
right,
voting. So it's
and so some of even though
it's not 6%, but 1/6, and then you got the entire city for the general.
As we know, city races are nonpartisan, but as we also know, they can be kind of partisan. And so to take Singh's example, she's in the 3rd district, which if you look at voting patterns in other races, the 3rd district is the most Republican-leaning district in the city. The city overall leans pretty Democratic, but there's variations, and the 3rd district is the more Republican of the districts. And James Corcoran, who ran against Singh in 2017, is a Republican.
Right.
Seema Singh ran in that race as part of the city council movement. It was quite progressive grassroots organization. And so it wasn't a surprise that the 3rd district in the primary voted for the Republican. And then they go to a citywide race where the overall city leans more Democratic. And so it was a surprise, but it wasn't a complete shock in 2017 when Singh actually won citywide, because she was drawing on a more progressive voting base, and that definitely did disadvantage Corcoran in that race. There have also been examples. One of the previous to Singh's win, the most notable one I can think of was when Danny Mayfield got elected to city council, which I think was in 1997, going back a ways, where in the 6th district primary, he was running against incumbent Bill Powell, who was a longtime council member there. And Powell won pretty easily in the primary. And that's a majority-minority district. Both candidates were black, both Danny Mayfield and Powell were black, so race didn't particularly enter into that equation electorally. But Mayfield ran this very vibrant, campaign, offering himself up as new blood or whatever. And so he wasn't very well known, and it wasn't a surprise that he didn't win in the primary, but he kind of caught fire between the primary and the general. He brought in a bunch of donors and people, very few of them who lived in the 6th district, who got excited by his campaign, and he was able to win citywide. And so in both of those cases, you had candidates who were kind of like less conventional candidates for that district and weren't as well known in the district, but because of this system, in both cases, these kind of very grassroots candidates were actually able to garner citywide enthusiasm and defeat establishment opponents. On the other hand, of course, sticking with that 6th district, you could also have a situation, it is a majority-minority district, where you had a black candidate finish first in the primary and a white candidate finish second, and then they could go on to the general. Of course, the city overall is majority white, and so it's not inconceivable that citywide, like a well-funded white candidate who had finished a distant second in the primary could beat the better-known within the district black candidate in the general election. So these things can cut lots of different ways.
Yeah, that was, that has been a concern within the African American community for some time, but it's never happened.
Right.
And so it's a theoretical concern, but as it stands, it doesn't happen. I mean, the current representative of the 6th district, Quinn McKenzie, ran against a well-funded and with a candidate with a high name recognition citywide in her first race,
2017,
and won handily.
Yeah,
and so it has been a concern, but I mean, she is in favor of keeping the current system. Her husband, Sam McKenzie, who is a state legislator, is also opposed to making any changes. And
people on city council especially don't like the idea of the legislature coming in and telling them how to run elections.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Nobody wants the legislature to stick their nose in Knoxville's business, essentially. But one thing we talked about how the residents of a district might feel like their choice was taken away when things like that happen. But on the other hand, what council members and we'll talk about is how running citywide gives you a more citywide perspective, and that you will, because every resident of the city is a constituent, then you will look at things issues and approach them with the idea of what's best for the city, not just what's best for my collection of neighborhoods.
Right.
That's the argument that way.
And for better or for worse, the current system does seem to give you a more philosophically unified city council because you literally have the same voting base electing all of the seats. Is that good? I don't know.
Right.
It's good if you're the mayor and you have a friendly relationship with a majority on city council who were all elected by the same people who you were. And I think, we've seen that in certainly recent decades. Mayors have generally had pretty friendly relationships with the council majority. On the other hand, if you're somebody who thinks, council should be made up of a diversity of voices, if everybody's being elected by the same voters, you're less likely to get that. And I think it's not at all a surprise that we're seeing this proposal from Republicans who have been having a hard time winning races citywide in Knoxville. And so if you are, Elaine Davis's campaign manager was Eric Wyatter, who is the guy who also ran a slate of Republican candidates, including in the 3rd District, for city council races in 2021, and he lost all of those. And I'm sure there is some frustration there, thinking, well, if you're a Republican and every single race has to be citywide, that deck is pretty well stacked against you, even if a specific district actually leans Republican.
Yeah, the uniformity of, it's not uniformity, but kind of a consistency of philosophy that you talked about, is something that's very evident. It has been for a long time. When Victor Ashe was the mayor of the city, he had on the city councils that the city elected then, we had a majority, usually 7 to 8, who were basically Republicans, kind of pro-business, traditional Republicans, just like Victor, and that helped him be able to move through this. The city's become more progressive. So has the electorate. The people they elected become more progressive. So now we have a fairly progressive mayor, a majority of progressives on city council, and I don't know if when you look back and you think about it, I don't think it'll dramatically change.
Right. Because there really would only be a couple of districts that would be kind of ideologically affected, potentially, I think.
Yeah. But anyway, getting back to what happened in the legislature this week, Davis's bill breezed out of committee, and it's heading toward a floor vote. The
legislators kind of sounded baffled that this system even existed.
Yeah. It was. They didn't understand the system. They didn't understand how it could be. And so it passed with bipartisan support. There was one Democrat on the committee who voted against it. Sam McKenzie is on that committee, but he was traveling for business. His private, he's got a job too, and was actually in New York, or going from D.C. to here, but had to go through New York, and was at the airport when all that happened. So, and here's kind of the monkey wrench thing. On the Senate side, Richard Briggs is the sponsor, and he really doesn't care what Knoxville's election system is, except he wants to make sure it's legal and constitutional. If it is legal and constitutional, he told me he is not inclined to push the bill forward. And if it is considered illegal or unconstitutional, he will push the bill. But that's his basic.
And how is he aiming to figure out if it's legal or constitutional?
He's working with Mark Goins, who's the state administrator of elections. He is speaking with constitutional lawyers and some people. It's funny. The attorney general doesn't want to weigh in on pending legislation, so that's not the traditional avenue of help isn't available to this legislature, and really, barring a Supreme Court decision, the constitutionality of anything is up for debate.
Sure.
And so I'm not sure. It was to be considered this week as well. Briggs delayed it. I think that unless he gets a definitive answer, at least to his satisfaction, that he's going to just delay it until it fades away.
Right, and he chairs in the Senate the State and Local Government Committee, which is a very powerful committee that this would have to come through. Yeah, all election bills come through that committee.
That's right. Yeah, he is the committee chair, so he is basically the one who decides what legislation gets discussed and voted on, and what legislation
and especially doesn't. As the sponsor of the
bill. And
he's
the sponsor of the bill, so he's kind of got the double power there.
Right. Well, we'll see what happens there. If it passes, would it affect this year's elections, or would it have to take effect in 2 years?
I do not know. I think that it would affect this election, because as soon as the governor signs it, it goes into effect.
Right.
And this year's general election is in November.
Right.
It would not affect any of the incumbent district representatives except Charlie Thomas.
Right, because that's only the 5th district race is only the 5th district seat is up this year.
Only the 5th district seat is up this year. The other 5 seats, the occupants are term limited anyway. So it won't. Next time the election rolls around, somebody else will be running.
Right, gotcha. All right. Well, it's an interesting one. Okay, now we are getting up to our interview, and we talked to Ellie Kittrell, who is with the United Way of Greater Knoxville, and she and United Way this past week had a big launch party at the Standard downtown, the way they do these big rollouts of public policy initiatives, and this is called the Bright Steps Initiative, and it's tied into a statewide effort called Bright Start, which kind of organized by a group called Tennesseans for Quality Early Education. And what this is all about is reaching, nurturing, caring for, and teaching kids between the ages of 0 and 5 before they ever get to public schools. There's been a lot of talk in recent years about 3rd grade reading scores in particular, and by 3rd grade, kids have to be here, and there's debate about what you do if they're not, and so forth, which we've talked about. But this effort is really based on a lot of brain science that's out there about how much the brain develops before any kid ever steps foot inside a kindergarten classroom. The science says that your brain reaches about 90% of its adult size by the time you're 5. Of course, there's still, a lot
to learn.
Right, exactly. There's a lot to fill in there. But those early years and the experiences that children have, and not just kind of what we think of as academic or learning experiences, like can they read before they start kindergarten, but all of their experiences, how they're cared for, whether they are in a loving, supportive, rich environment in various ways.
It looks at the child in a more holistic way.
Exactly, and really understanding that everything that happens to and around a kid during those early years has an outsized impact on them as people, on their future growth and development, including, not limited to, their academic success in school. And so they have a report up, over 100-page report, which you can read on the United Way website, which has an action plan. And basically, this is not like we're going to do one thing. They're trying to draw on all the existing resources that are out there, find ways to bolster them, create maybe new resources in places where there are gaps, and bring funding, public funding, private funding, foundation grants, etc., to bear on this to try to ensure that everybody ages 0 to 5 has access to good, dependable, high quality, as they call it, child care and education. And so we talked with Ellie about that, and let's go to the interview and let her tell us all about it. All right, joining us this week on the podcast is Ellie Kittrell, who is the Director of Early Care and Education Systems for United Way of Greater Knoxville, which is a long title. And one of the first things I'm going to do is ask her to explain what that means. But Ellie, could you, first of all, just maybe go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit? People probably know you from a couple of different things in the community. You were very involved with the Muse Knoxville for years. So who are you and what are you doing?
All right, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you both, and especially to talk about early care and education, which has been a long-term passion of mine. As you know, I helped start the Muse Knoxville Children's Museum, Knoxville's first children's museum in our area, about a decade ago, and served as executive director there for many years. And really, along with my passion for early childhood, started to grow in frustration that we were just not having the right conversations here locally around just how critical early childhood is in building that foundation for lifelong learning. A lot of people would kind of dismiss the children's museum concept as entertainment and not a have to have. And I was trying to make the argument like, no, these high quality learning experiences are a have to have, and here is why. And so really started thinking about how can we amplify that message and create a broader platform for early childhood, and started doing some research and investigating what's happening in other communities across the nation that have embraced early childhood better, in my opinion. And across the board, what I found is they all had a strategic plan at that county or city level, or even state. Some states have statewide early care and education plans, and had really done a great job of galvanizing a variety of organizations and stakeholders around that plan. And so a few years ago set forth and having some early conversations around that, planting seeds. One of those conversations was with United Way, and the rest is history, so to say. Of course, there's more about that, but it was really excellent timing for us to move forward.
Right. And so you're working for United Way, but you're also kind of in collaboration with this statewide yes. Bright Starts effort, which is really an initiative of a nonprofit called the Tennesseans for Quality Early Education.
Yes.
So how can you talk a little bit about what is that Bright Starts effort, and then what is the local component of it, which you're really setting up?
Absolutely. So first of all, so Tennesseans for Quality Early Education, that was one of the organizations that I was researching and stalking in those early days of trying to figure out, hey, what are other communities doing better than what we're doing here? And then we were really fortunate. One of our local stars, Jonathan Schoonover, was hired by TQEE, and one of the big things that he was tasked with doing was to put together a statewide initiative called Bright Start Tennessee Network that would effectively have TQEE as an organization providing technical assistance and support to 6 different local communities across the state of Tennessee in the development of their own early care and education strategic plan. I mean, when I say the timing was perfect, it was perfect. I was in the middle of this researching and digging in, had this kind of kismet conversation with Jonathan Schoonover, who had just made this move over to TQEE, and he's like, "This is great," and we just kind of hit the ground running from that point. And TQE has been an incredible partner for us in this work. They have, come alongside us and supported us. They've brought national resources and research and best practices to us to help guide our planning process. They've trained us in collective impact, which has been incredible, results-based facilitation. Just invaluable resources that they've brought to us in this planning. The other aspect of that, however, is, there's some patterns that we're seeing. The Bright Steps Action Plan is a local plan. It's developed specifically for Knoxville, Knox County, but there's a lot of overlap in the needs and gaps, root causes that we are seeing in this space across the state. And so where we have those overlaps with our other Bright Start counterparts and other communities across the state, we're tracking those, we're pulling those together. TQEE, of course, instrumental in that. and sharing that statewide voice and those statewide needs in our advocacy efforts at the state level and even at the federal level.
So, yeah, you mentioned the action plan, and that's why we have you on this week, because you rolled out on Tuesday after, many months, or I guess a year plus of work and community meetings and so forth, the Bright Steps action plan for Knoxville, Knox County. And let's get into this a little bit. There was a lot said at that event, a lot of statistics thrown out about the importance of early childhood. And to be clear, when we talk about early childhood, we're basically talking about those ages from 0 to 5 or so, before kids enter the public school system typically. Why are those years so important? What does the data show? Because I think this whole effort is very much driven by data. What do we know about how important that is? And where, I guess, are we falling short in that?
Absolutely. As I've been meeting with different groups and again, trying to educate Knoxville and Knox Countyans on just how critical early childhood is and the why, I tend to focus on 3 main topic areas. 1, brain science; 2, the economic impact; and 3, equitable access to resources and opportunity. The brain science is very, very clear. Children are born with an incredible potential for development. 90% of the brain is developed by age 5, 80% by age 3. This is the most elastic time in human brain development. It's critical. Over 1 million new neural connections are being formed every 30 seconds during this stage. And not to get completely into the neuroscientist realm, I'm certainly not a neuroscientist, but if we think about it, how often those neural connections are reinforced with repetition and positive experiences, that's what creates that really strong brain architecture. On the flip side, if it's a negative experience, like an adverse childhood experience or community experience like COVID, for example, or gun violence in a particular neighborhood and pocket community, other traumas that can happen within a household or learning environment, that disrupts that neural connection. And so what we really see is just how critical high quality learning environments are between, prenatal really through age 5. And we need to have some bolder conversations about increasing those opportunities here in Knoxville, Knox County. The economic impact for not having enough of these high quality learning environments, one of the most common ways that we have those environments is through our childcare opportunities, right? 2/3 of our families have both all adults in the household working outside of the home. So childcare is a huge need for our workforce. And there's been quite a bit of disruption there. We've got over 10% of the workforce in childcare sector that's pulled out. And probably, I don't know if they're coming back. So we've really got to work on that. But the high quality environments in childcare is one of our targets that we're really focusing on, both increasing the capacity for parents, but also in increasing the quality for the child's brain development specifically. In 2022, so last year, we had over $108 million economic loss for our economy here in Knoxville, Knox County due to these disruptions and lack of access to quality, affordable childcare. So it's a big deal. The other impact on our economy, if we think about it, we invest a lot of money in programs here locally to change the brain, if you think about it, right? We've got anywhere from elementary tutoring intervention programs and behavioral programs. We've got youth development. We've got career development programs. We've got workforce training and post-secondary. We've got, rehabilitation programs. You name it. lots of different programs to change the brain. But the reality, because of the way the brain forms, our highest impact, our highest return on those investments, early childhood. Mm-hmm. If we have a child that is living in poverty, every dollar invested in high quality intervention and learning environments for that child will have a 13-to-1 return on investment. That same child in high school, that return on investment goes down to less than 2-to-1. Mm-hmm. So we have a mismatch in how we are funding those programs to change the brain. And that's something we're also trying to educate the community about. The last thing is equity of access, right? Poverty creates pretty significant disparities across a lot of systems at play here, but equally so in early care and education access. And what that looks like by the time we get into kindergarten is typically children that are growing up in lower income households are starting behind anywhere between 12 and 14 months on average. By the time they get to kindergarten. That gap is really difficult to close by third grade. We are having a lot of conversations around third grade right now with, third grade reading proficiency and those being tied to the third grade retention law that the state passed. Mm-hmm. So that closing that gap by third grade is something we need to have our eyes on.
So what are the what types of organizations will you be working with in order to create these environments that you're talking about?
So we have a pretty broad list of stakeholders. It's all hands on deck for sure. But organizations that we are working with specifically are at the moment, and this is not going to be, finalist by any stretch of the means. We're working with a lot of our aftercare providers, like YMCA and Boys and Girls Clubs and Centro Hispano and others. We're working with organizations like Harmony Family Center, Helen Ross McNabb, East Tennessee Children's Hospital, UT Medical Center, Health Department, Parents as Teachers, Knox Ed Foundation, Knox County Schools, of course, Head Start with CAC. These are all organizations that are working hard to provide high quality learning environments. Muse Knoxville, of course, Children's Museum, our libraries, our public libraries are excellent learning environments. So we're trying to provide regular convening of these types of groups towards shared collaboration and solutions. One of those examples is we mentioned trying to create increased capacity for high quality childcare spots here in Knoxville, Knox County. We're partnering with YMCA as a childcare provider. They will be providing microcenter childcare on site at a variety of different local host sites. One of those being Hillcrest Healthcare. They were featured at the Bright Steps launch. We're going to be hopefully providing childcare at a local elementary school, at Pellissippi State, potentially. And there's a number of other organizations that we've been talking with. So United Way is effectively just acting as that convener and pulling all those people together, helping identify resources, blocking and tackling, potentially some of the red tape that exists and creating those collaboratives, but just strengthening that conversation and moving the ball forward. That's just one example.
Well, and I think that if people are at all familiar with the conversation around early learning, it has in the past often revolved around pre-kindergarten and this idea of, should the state have universal pre-K, for example. But pre-kindergarten itself is often only a year before kindergarten. And this seems like a much broader look at, it's not just that year of when they're 4 to 5, but it's really starting much earlier. And I don't think anybody is really talking about oh yes, we're going to have a public school system that starts with kids when they're 0 and takes them all the way through. So what does this, you talked at the rollout about, maybe wanting to raise in the vicinity of $25 million from various sources. first of all, what are the potential sources for that kind of funding? But secondly, what are the streams that would go toward? Are we talking about private daycare centers? Are we talking about nonprofits? Does the school system play a role here? Like, where does that money theoretically go?
All of the above, Jesse. For sure. So funding streams, of course, that's another area where United Way comes into play and helping with, researching and leveraging funds into this solution. But federal and state funds, of course, we'll be looking to city and county support. We'll be looking at local family foundations and education foundations, individual donors, of course. I think grants are going to be a huge part of the funding stream coming in. And luckily, there's a lot of momentum around early care and education at the state and federal level. So we anticipate some pretty significant grant dollars coming down over the next few years in support of a variety of the strategies that we're proposing. So that's great news. How we tackle this? How do we? First of all, we have to recognize that there is not one size fits all solution to this. It is. It's not going to work for every family to have their child in childcare, for example, right? We do have a lot of households that have an adult that's in the household that can watch that young child before they get to kindergarten. So we need to have resources in place to ensure that they understand what the developmental needs are of their child, what it's going to take to make sure they're ready to enter kindergarten, and that they're connected to and understand if there is a developmental delay or something that they're seeing, that they have access to early intervention assessment and therapies. And that is a huge need. We have a pretty significant percentage of parents and caregivers that report not really understanding what developmental needs are and what resources are available to help them out. So when we talk about, when we look into the childcare piece and actually having early care learning environments in the child care realm, that's also going to be a multi-delivery proposition. That's going to look like, traditional child care centers, home and family care providers, mom's day outs and churches. It's going to look like co-ops and camps and, all kinds of things. And there is no one right way in terms of the infrastructure necessarily to do it. There are some standards that we would like to recommend that kind of explain what a high quality environment would be for a young child. And we are hoping, again, to just convene those variety of childcare providers together to help strengthen their understanding of that, to learn from one another, and ultimately to strengthen the business of childcare, whatever that looks like.
One thing, it's easy to go through the providers, but you mentioned the people who either parents or other caregivers who just keep their kids at home. How are you going to be able to do outreach to them to let them know what's available and what's possible?
So the action plan recommends a variety of fronts to do that. There are several different communication campaigns that we are recommending be developed to tackle that would be integrated, marketing and communications campaigns, honestly, and would start with assessing, how does that parent caregiver that is primarily home based, how do they receive information? What's the best way to get that messaging to them? Is it through their pediatric provider? Is it through the OB? Is it through website, social media, video campaigns, et cetera? Or is it by word of mouth and relationship? And do we need to tackle, some different cultural barriers there and language barriers? So that's one aspect. We've talked about the development of a resource hub. Couldn't tell you what that looks like yet. It needs to be defined by those in which we are trying to serve. So that is coming. So part of the action plan is deeper planning, if that makes sense, right? And deeper needs assessment to make sure that what we are providing by way of solution is truly what our community wants and needs. We know that access to information and resources is a huge gap that we need to address. How we do it is still yet to come in the planning phase.
Well, I guess that's a good place to maybe wrap up for now. It's a good intro to a very large, multi-pronged topic and effort. People can find out more about this at the United Way website, right?
Yes. So uwgk.org/bright-steps is where you will find information about this initiative. You can download the full action plan, which is 126 pages. We're working on adding a downloadable link for our executive summary as well. This will tell you, at a very high level, hey, these are the strategies that we're recommending, goals of the initiative over the next few years. There's some great data out there, particularly for our nonprofit partners. And it also, we share ways for how you can get involved, whether you are an individual, you're a citizen in Knoxville, Knox County, and you want to figure out, hey, how can I get involved in this space and help push this plan forward? We have recommendations for organizations and also for elected officials.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll certainly continue to keep in touch with you as this whole effort moves forward, and maybe have you back to talk about it again in the future and kind of see where we are.
Absolutely. I would appreciate that opportunity, and there's so much to come. I can't wait to share more later as we make more progress on these plans, and we appreciate your voice in our community and sharing what's going on here at United Way. So thank you so much.
All right. Thanks a lot, Ellie. Thanks again to Ellie for talking with us. And again, if you want more information about all of that, you can go to the website of the United Way of Greater Knoxville. Let's look ahead to the coming week. We do have some public meetings and so forth on the calendar. The school board will be having its monthly meetings this week. They'll have their work session Monday at 5 p.m. and their voting session Thursday at 5 p.m. Both of those in the Summer Place boardroom. Various things on the agenda. Maybe the most interesting is this issue of who pays for playgrounds, which we've talked about before. Board member Daniel Watson is bringing an item basically seeking to commit the school board and the school district to paying for playgrounds at elementary schools, which is something they don't currently do. So, of course, we'll see how that discussion goes. And then, Scott, a couple things coming up on Tuesday, right?
Oh, yeah. Tuesday, we have the Sports Authority is going to be meeting Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. They hadn't put up the agenda by the time we started taping this, but they're going to be discussing the final cost of the multi-use stadium and voting
the actual budget
the
for the stadium.
actual budget engraved in stone for that. It's been delayed several times. This particular meeting was delayed from February, but they haven't met since November, I believe, of last year. So, because this is the last thing that needs to be done, and they've the construction manager's been sending out has been bidding out jobs, subcontracts. They should have a good idea of how much it's going to cost, and so they will probably take that and put it into the lease agreement with the Tennessee Smokies and the development agreement with Randy Boyd, and insert those numbers, vote on it, sign it, and then the stadium construction could begin in earnest
Right, because that's the final step, right? This does not have to come back to City Council
Doesn't
or
have to
County
come back.
Commission.
No, they gave the approval for the sports. They gave the sports authority the authority to enter into these deals more than a year ago, a year and a half ago. So it's a done deal. What we don't know is how much it's going to cost, and the supply chain issues and inflation and interest rate rises. Those have all put that in flux, and so it will be interesting to see how much more. We know it's going to be more than the $80.1 million that the original guesstimate was for the project. We don't know how much more, and so I mean,
I'm going to go out on a limb. We don't do a whole lot of prognosticating here, but this number is going to be over $100 million.
I think you're probably right. Randy Boyd has said he would loan the Sports Authority up to $20 million essentially above the $80 million.
Right.
So that puts it right at $100 million. So, and I think you're right that will be the case. How much higher than $100 million?
Well, and one wrinkle here, right, is that part of the deal is Boyd is taking personal responsibility for any amount above whatever this final budget number
whatever
is.
this number is what they call the guaranteed maximum price.
Right.
And anything above that, Boyd will just have to pay out of pocket.
And so from a purely personally interested standpoint, one would think that it's really kind of in Boyd's interest for this number to be a bit higher rather than lower, because the lower that number is, the greater the likelihood that it's going to go over and he's going to have to pay out of pocket.
Right. Yeah. So
But I guess we'll see what happens there. Okay, and then City Council's meeting that night.
City Council's meeting that night won't be nearly as exciting. There's not a whole lot of controversial stuff on the agenda. One of the things they're doing several property transfers at the St. Mary's site to kind of get it ready. They're going to be giving conveying some land to Lincoln Memorial University, which operates in the office tower there. But they're going to own property out from the office tower. It's going to remain green space. It's basically going to be a park, but LMU is going to control it, own it. And then the old historic hospital site and the land around it. There's quite a bit of land around it. That is all going to be conveyed to KCDC, and KCDC then is going to lead the redevelopment of that property, but with the private sector. They're in talks with people. Don't know who yet about the hospital building itself. Then they're going to build other, and probably will be housing for the most part.
So will this be like a request for proposals that
Yes,
will come from
yes.
KCDC?
KCDC would send out a request for proposals and see what kind of response they get and what kind of proposals they get. The building it's funny, you couldn't really see the building when the hospital around it was there. Now that the hospital is gone, except for this building, it's a neat old building.
Yeah, it is.
It's a really pretty old building. It was built in 1930, and the city is pretty optimistic that somebody will be able to put it back to good use. Shouldn't say the last, but later in the week, the Planning Commission is going to be meeting, and they'll go through their usual assortment of rezoning requests and plan approvals and everything. But one item kind of stood out when I looked at the preliminary agenda, is that Ancient Lore Village is coming forward with a request.
The South Knoxville destination that is definitely not based on Lord of the Rings.
Oh, definitely not. No, it has nothing to do with Lord of the Rings whatsoever. Anyway,
At least as far as the J.R.R. Tolkien
yes,
estate is concerned.
this is the passion of Randy Boyd's father, Tom
Right.
Boyd, and several years ago he had proposed a resort, a fantasy themed resort, not based on the Lord of the Rings in any way whatsoever.
Based on a book that he actually wrote himself.
He wrote a backstory to it
Yeah.
that has characters in it that are very similar to Lord of the Rings characters.
Yes.
But anyway, he wanted it to be a resort, but the land was zoned for agricultural use. Overwhelming opposition from people who lived in this area. This is in South Knox County, just right outside the city limits, between Chapman Highway and Sevierville Pike.
On a very narrow road.
Very narrow road. Anyway, so what Boyd did to get this approved was he changed his plans, although he didn't ever really admit to changing his plans, but he did. Instead of a resort, it was going to be an event space. And basically, I mean, there's some distinctions there. You know, a resort, you can have a restaurant that's open all hours and serves anybody. An event space, you can have a kitchen, but you know, it's for caterers. You know, that you have to bring the food in and do it. You know, and it's not open to the general public and that sort of thing. So he's got this, and it ended up getting approved. He built 7 overnight accommodations that look like, but are not based on Hobbit homes.
Right.
Lord of the Rings.
These are not Hobbit
No.
homes. They're just other houses with round doors.
With round doors and dug into the hillside. Anyway, well, they've got a new proposal, and it's going to double the number of units to 14, it's they want to build what they're calling seven what they're calling tree houses. What they are is up in the wooded area on the property. They're going to be putting these small wooden structures on top of big, large diameter posts. So they look like trees and tree houses, but they're not actual tree houses. But anyway, they want to do that. They'll need some variances. They've got some things that they're going to need to get from the Planning Commission. And again, there's overwhelming opposition from people in the area. Not everybody, but there's don't know how big of a fight they'll end up putting over this, but it will be interesting, and we do get to make all kinds of have all kinds of fun with the fantasy theme.
It's
again.
very good for our, at the bottom of our email we have a GIF or GIF, depending on how you pronounce that word. I'm on the GIF side. I understand that's a minority position. We can talk about it another time. But at the bottom of our email every day, we have a GIF image, and Ancient Lore has been great for, because, you've got all the Lord of the Rings movies to draw on and so forth,
Yeah.
even though this, again, is not based on or have any official relationship whatsoever to any property controlled by the Tolkien estate. But yes, it is. It does give us.
It gives us some opportunity to have. One of the things that's kind of fun is, we do a lot of coverage of bill. I mean, this the first part of the podcast. We talked about serious bills that are in front of the legislature that affect thousands of people, and these.
Sometimes in potentially negative ways.
In potentially negative ways.
Or positive ways. Depends on your point of view.
And then we have, as journalists, we cover, murders and car crashes and all kinds of serious stuff. And this is a serious matter, don't get me wrong, but it's kind of fun.
Right.
It's kind
I
of
think
fun.
for the local residents who really don't like this, the fact that all of the rest of us find it so sort of entertaining is probably annoying.
Yeah,
apologies to our South Knox
that's what I meant. It's a
readers.
serious.
It is serious, but it's also kind of hard not to have fun with it.
Yeah,
It's kind of whimsical. I mean, in its conception, it's a pretty whimsical project.
Yeah, it's like when it would be like if someone showed up at the state legislature dressed in drag. It's kind of there's there for a serious thing, but it's kind of fun.
Yeah.
It's.
All right. Well, I think that wraps us up for this week. We will be back next week to talk about all of those things. Thanks, as always, to Seth Barber for his production with Barbarian Productions. Our theme music is by Will Wright. And I am going to go back and listen to some more De La Soul. Talk to you later.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.